Well, hello everyone, and welcome to the first ever live Q&A for American thought leaders. What I'm going to be doing going forward actually is interviewing some of the Epoch Times reporters, other personalities, and so forth. We have a huge story that Cathy He, who is with me here today, basically uncovered through some leaked documents. And we've all known actually that communist China is determined to basically control as much of the internet that goes into China as much as possible. What we haven't necessarily known, we haven't had a lot of evidence for yet until these documents were unearthed, is that there's a basically Xi Jinping plan to control the entirety of the global internet. So Cathy, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Jan. Thanks for having me.
Well, so, we titled this Inside Communist China's Plan to Control the Global Internet. Tell me just briefly overview, what did you find?
Yeah, so we found a few government documents that were basically relaying two major speeches that Xi Jinping made to China's internet regulator, outlining his plans for basically how China should move ahead in controlling not just its own internet, which it's kind of been very successful at doing the last 10 years, but expanding abroad and basically controlling the world's internet. So in these documents, he actually mentions that controlling the internet means controlling the world. And it is quite right, because basically all of our modern communications, information, it's all dependent on the internet, and obviously he grasps that. And it's really not enough that China has over the years developed the world's largest intranet through the Great Firewall, but it's now wanting to export this system abroad. And he does lists a number of, it's a very comprehensive actually plan, and he lists a number of ways in which he thinks China can get there. So actually one of the ways, and he talks about basically the importance of global standard setting bodies and international bodies in the way to control the rules and the infrastructure underlying the internet. So he was talking about sending China, like basically Chinese officials to run standard setting bodies overseas that control basically how all the mechanisms and the rules that underlie the internet, and at the same time also basically being in a position to control the infrastructure that underlies the internet. So a lot of it is about controlling the core technologies involved, and China is still kind of not that far in this plan, but has definitely started thinking about this at least as at 2017, which is when the speech was made.
I mean, this is just incredible. And, I just wanted to mention to everybody that's watching, this is actually, we're going to be taking a lot of questions from the audience. I'm just getting this started up here. As you're describing this, Cathy, I'm thinking of the International Telecommunications Union. This is a UN agency. It's basically, responsible for setting standards on communications, on computer communications, and so forth. And this is actually run by a Chinese national, someone ostensibly under the Chinese Communist Party.
Yeah, so he's been, I can't remember his name now, but he's been general secretary for quite a number of years. And conveniently, 2 years ago, Huawei, so I think everyone knows Huawei by now, the China's national champion in telecommunications and hardware. So they actually went into a meeting in the body and proposed this idea for a brand new internet, and they call it New IP. And basically their pitch is the internet that we've run on for 50 years, it's just it's broken. It's a bit slow. There's not enough security. We need a better infrastructure to, go into the 21st century with, AI and big data and like these new technologies. We need better infrastructure to support all these cool new technologies. So what do we have here? We have new IP that's going to be built by Huawei and built by a bunch of Chinese companies, and we want to basically replace the internet with that. And so they came in with that idea, and that was in 2019, I believe, and it's now set to be debated by the body in 2022, so next year. Though it probably won't get off the ground because it is really just such a new it probably won't get the support it needs from particularly the US, but it's just going to show that in 2017 Xi Jinping was talking about exactly that, controlling the infrastructure of the internet, and then 1 year later we have Huawei pitching an idea for a new internet. So they're really going out to like implement these plans, and they're very serious about this.
Well, and it's kind of mind-blowing when you think about it. I mean, you have a regime that is, involved in all sorts of crimes against humanity, right? And actual documented genocide, forced billion-dollar industry and forced organ harvesting from prisoners of conscience, Falun Gong practitioners, Uyghurs, Tibetans, we don't know, maybe other people. And they're expecting that basically the keys to the global internet will be handed to them. Is this what you're saying?
Yeah, I mean, that's exactly what the proposal is. They think, I mean, in terms of the business and marketing pitch for this new IP, because right now the internet, arguably it's not perfect. It wasn't, when it was designed 50 years ago, it wasn't designed to support 4.3 billion people in the world, and it wasn't designed to support these technologies that we're having coming, these new kind of integrated technologies that we're getting. And there are security issues, and there are issues. So we don't have a perfect internet right now. So they're kind of saying, great, we've got a better idea. We're going to create this new internet that's going to be really fast and secure and going to protect your privacy. And the only catch is that it'll have to be made by us. So that's where they're going. That's what they're going for. As to whether it will be adopted, I think many people are very skeptical right now.
Well, okay, I'm going to go to an audience question now. So here goes. This is from Sean Ellis. Is there a way to criminally charge Google or any US tech company that works with China, the CCP, or any part of their armed forces? If not, is there a practical push for this?
Well, the US does have export control laws that basically the goal of these laws is to ban technology and other things from going to states, to hostile enemy states that help their military. So there's already a system that prevents, ostensibly prevents that from happening. So Google going into like specifically aid the Chinese military. But with China, what's kind of complicated actually is the fact that they have this doctrine called civil military fusion. So the idea is actually, it's not just military and private companies. The CCP basically believes that everything in the private sector has to be leveraged for military development. So there's like this symbiotic relationship. So there's no such thing as something that's purely private and not military anymore. So the difficulty now is when American companies cooperate or transfer tech, and have business arrangements with these ostensibly private companies that say they don't work for the military, but in fact do, because this is how China's system is run. So the Trump administration really tried to kind of close that gap, and they added a lot of companies onto the trade blacklist, saying that they, even though they're private companies, they aided the Chinese military. And also, like a really big move that President Donald Trump did was ban US investment in companies that were deemed to support the Chinese military. And that was last year, and it's now a question of whether Biden will continue that that executive order. I think it's currently under review.
No, that's really interesting. And Cathy, I really appreciate you joining us from Australia. I was just looking at you're a bit fuzzy in there for our viewers. Cathy is actually in quarantine in Australia, going through those weeks, and this was the best internet connection we could get to her. So, but thanks for taking the time to be able to do this with us. And viewers, please forgive us for the the blurriness, but the voice is coming through loud and clear. And frankly, incredibly scary stuff, because something else in these documents is, that the CCP system of internet actually prioritizes spying on everybody, right? Isn't that actually in these documents?
Yeah, I mean, this is no secret. You don't really need to go to secret government documents to realize that, China has this thing called the Great Firewall, which basically they've established the world's largest intranet where they can control what comes in and goes out and what people say. So, companies like Google, Facebook, they don't operate, they're not available on China's internet. The Epoch Times obviously is not available on Chinese internet. So, it's based upon a system of like complete censorship and complete control. And also, of course, surveillance is a huge factor that goes into it. So, what people say on the internet is not private. It is definitely scoured by, Chinese tech that is searching the internet for sensitive words, whether it's Falun Gong or Uyghur Muslims. You will be flagged. And in actually, like in many cases, I mean, there are actually so many famous cases where people are arrested and detained for what they say online. And the most famous case in the last few years was Dr. Li Wenliang, the whistleblower doctor who sounded the alarm about the COVID-19 just before it was publicly known. And he actually just put a message on a private group chat on their social media, and that was that kind of went viral, and then he was reprimanded by police. And you have a lot of other instances of Chinese people also. So many Chinese people actually tried to seek to break through the firewall, and they call it using VPNs or other software. And they've, for instance, set up Twitter accounts, which Twitter's not available in China, and they've made comments on Twitter. So obviously no one in China is reading these tweets, but local police are monitoring, and they've been arrested as well or disappeared. So that is also happening in China too. So it's controlling what people say both inside China's internet and outside if they're able to jump over the Great Firewall. So yeah, that is China's system, and they want to bring that to the world.
Well, right. And there's also what you actually do online actually sort of counts towards your social credit score, from what I understand. So of course, there's these kinds of scenarios that you just described. But for example, maybe you're eating too much high calorie food or fried food or something like that. And suddenly, you could be flagged by some sort of AI and basically reduced in your ability to buy food from marketplaces, for example. I'm just using a banal example, but tell me a little bit about the development of this social credit system.
Yeah, so with this social credit system, the idea is basically, it all feeds into this surveillance censorship apparatus. So, if you make a bad comment online, that was too sensitive or mentioned, it was a no-no for the CCP, your social credit score will be reduced. And that means you don't have access to services. You can't buy that train ticket to see your family back at home anymore, or you can't apply for a job application. So it severely restricts your ability basically to progress in society. And so how China's control of the internet really works is that, they will be monitoring what you say online, and then that contributes to your social credit score, and then using that same technology will be basically banning you from accessing, airline ticket websites to buy things. And that is the fear that, if China is allowed to export their internet infrastructure, they're going to it's going to be a part of this package of exporting this global social credit system where we will be monitored online. We will be surveilled, and then potentially we will have our services cut off because that Chinese company that we rely on for, I don't know, buying our goods, they're not going to give us products because we've said something wrong. So that is immense fear.
Absolutely Orwellian. And I just want to remind everyone that, in her article, Cathy talks about how in 2022, the International Telecommunications Union will be voting on whether to adopt this new internet backbone developed by the Chinese, or under the auspices of the Chinese Communist Party, where everything we've just been talking about would become a reality. Now, I imagine there's a lot of lobbying going on around that.
Yeah, I can only imagine, given China really likes working in multilateral institutions because it can basically lobby behind the doors and get countries that it's pretty close with, such as a lot of developing countries. So basically, other countries that are counterweight to the US to advance its agenda, and we've seen that in many other institutions. Obviously, a big one is the WHO, that in recent years, in terms of China's influence. So I could only imagine that China is doing the best it can to kind of get support for this new infrastructure, though practically speaking, they would have to convince the big US tech titans to get on board with this, and that seems highly unlikely.
Well, I just want to remind everybody, I see there's, in our live chat, please jump in and ask questions. We are eager, Cathy's eager. If she doesn't want to field them, I can jump in as well to field questions about this. This is obviously, very, very serious. And this is really the first time where we have very concrete evidence of the Chinese Communist Party's, plan to basically rule the global internet, right? And we're not talking just about internet for Chinese people. This is Chinese citizens and so forth. This is the entire system. And there's a kind of a three-pronged strategy that is approached. Can you kind of reiterate that for us, Cathy?
Yeah, so Xi Jinping was talking about actually, I mean, everything is framed in terms of a battle, actually. And when you look at Chinese communist speak and just the way they frame things. So he views the internet as actually a main battleground for how to control public opinion. And he views these international forums as, these international governance in relation to cyberspace as the main forum now. So that's his plan. So he really needs to get this approved abroad, and the way he sees that it should be done is by going to international standard setting bodies like the ITU. There are others in relation to the internet, but the ITU is obviously very convenient because they have a Chinese person in charge. But going to these bodies and dispatching Chinese people to be in charge of them, or to be in powerful positions in these bodies. And then at the same time, on top of their bodies, they want to actually control core infrastructure that underlies the internet. So he was talking about setting the roots, and that he was talking about underlying backbone things like domain name system, which is basically if you want to go to any website, you need to go through a DNS server, and there are only 13 in the world. Actually operated through a network of 1,300 around the world. So if, for instance, China was to control the DNS server, it would be able to control whether you have access to websites or not. So that is huge power. And so he's talking about controlling infrastructure that underlies the internet. And then finally, he was talking about basically setting the rules that govern the global internet. So we're talking about standards and rules, basically setting how things are done. So it's all foundational, and that's where his thinking is.
All right, I'm gonna jump in and do some audience questions here. We'll talk about DNS a little bit more because that is a deeply scary proposition. Because if you control the domain name servers, the root domain name servers, DNSs, the 1,300 around the world, I think China has 20 of them right now. Basically, you can control what website anyone actually goes to when you type in, for example, epochtimes.com. You could get sent to the CCP version, right? Or, a propaganda version just in an instant without even realizing that that had happened. Okay, but let me jump to this question. This is a good one. Gary R asks, why can some channels broadcast from China and not others? And I think what he means here is, why can certain media broadcast out of China and not others?
Yeah, so with the Great Firewall, with lots of, I'm assuming he's talking about Western media. A lot of them might, like, for instance, like the New York Times, and I mean, I'm pretty sure the Epoch Times is just permanently banned, but many other media, they haven't been permanently blacklisted from China's internet. So often what happens actually is that they're allowed to operate in China, but then what the Chinese government does is, oh, if the New York Times or Bloomberg, they maybe publish an investigative report. I mean, this is actually what has happened. Publish an investigative report that said some bad things about China's leaders, the Chinese leaders' families and all their overseas assets. The next day, they'll find that their platforms are not available in China anymore because they just shut them out of the Great Firewall. So they're really using basically access to the Chinese market through the Great Firewall as a stick to basically get Western companies to play by Chinese rules. So that's why you see that often media companies, Western media companies, they might be in for a bit and then maybe they're out for a bit if they do something, naughty. And that's what happens actually quite often. Yeah.
Cathy, let's go to your neck of the woods. CC here is asking, how far has the CCP gone towards this in Australia?
That's a really good question. So actually, if you've been following Australia's relationship with the China has actually, been quite sour the last year or so, mainly because Australia was really pushing back in terms of wanting to investigate the origins of the coronavirus, and that has led to a great many diplomatic spats. And there's actually a great awareness in Australia about China's efforts to influence politics here too. So actually, a lot of economic cooperation between China and Australia is now kind of at a halt. But in terms of technological cooperation and kind of links, actually, there's a very interesting case of there's a city in Australia called Darwin. It's in Northern Australia, where I used to live there. Actually, but a few years ago, they signed the city of Darwin. So this is not the state. The city of Darwin signed a cooperation agreement with, I think it was Huawei or a Chinese company, to basically set up what's called a smart city surveillance infrastructure network in that city. So if you don't know much about smart cities, it's basically Huawei and other Chinese companies going to other cities, regions in the world, saying, we'll install a network of surveillance cameras so you'll have a really safe city and you can use that to fight crime, which is great for safety, public safety. Obviously, the flip side of that is with Chinese technology, surveillance and a huge encroachment of, people's privacies and potentially also being used to spy on for China. So Darwin actually signed that with China a few years ago. So even in some pockets of Australia, probably regional areas and subnational levels, there is still a bit of cooperation that brings about concerns.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's incredible. And there's even there's another example in Canada where there's a restaurant chain that came out of China where basically one of the managers of one of these chain restaurants in Vancouver actually admitted there's like, I don't remember, like something like 100 cameras in this one little restaurant. And also that data is actually heading over to China, that China is using those cameras in Canada, in Vancouver, to surveil people that are coming in there, right? So just, incredible. This is the kind of potential that you have with this sort of smart city setup. This is basically, in my view, it's like white labeled surveillance state technology to other countries, to other cities. And the CCP benefits from that by basically getting all the data to develop its AIs and actually to build individual profiles on everybody. And that's also part of its kind of project. They're not just collecting data on Chinese citizens, they're collecting data on you and me. I mean, I guess everyone assumes they're collecting data on you and me, Cathy, but also on people that you just wouldn't expect, because they want to know how everyone stands with respect to the Chinese Communist Party, and reward those that stand positively and punish those who don't basically step in line.
Yeah, no, definitely. Like last year, there was this big data leak called the Zhenhua data leak, and that was some cybersecurity researchers found this, just online actually, they found this massive database. I think it had a few million profiles of people from all over the world, and it was basically just a Chinese, security company that was probably, with links to the Chinese military, obviously. They were basically grabbing, using actually just open source information to use mosaic analysis to grab information from people all over the world. And you just wonder what the Chinese Communist Party needs with that. And as you were saying, yes, it's to build a database of everyone, potentially for influence operations, for spy operations, for military operations. If they track the location of some military personnel who work in the Navy, I mean, that's very vital. That's very important information for, their military goals. So that definitely is part of their plan, just to get information on everyone and everything. And all of this, what we're talking about today, really goes towards that.
I want to sort of read a few comments here and questions. Do you realize they're not just trying to take over the internet? Robert Turpin. Robert, we really do realize this, but this is a really, really good point. This episode we're doing here, this is about the internet, obviously, but the internet is just a piece, but frankly, a really important piece, as we've been discussing. Let me see if I can, pull in a few other questions while we're doing this. Oh, okay, actually, this is a good one. Matt J. Who should the average citizen raise awareness with or on this matter? Politicians or technical standards organizations? Like, who are the people that are best to go for to kind of get some action on this?
So sorry, I just missed the first part. As an average citizen, did you say, or?
Yeah, exactly. If you're a regular person, you're watching this show, you feel concerned, what can you do?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question. I would say there actually are, when I was researching for this story, there were actually open internet bodies that voiced huge concern about China's plans, and especially with the new IP plan. And they were, obviously there are open internet advocates, and there are those bodies that I will provide at least information about this. But honestly, to me, this actually seems like the US government, if they're not looking at it now, this definitely needs to be something on their radar in terms of China's plans. So I guess it would have to be, your local politician, your representatives. These are people who will, they probably should be concerned about this. So I probably would start at politics.
Well, so here's an interesting question. Meeteek 12 is looking ahead into a bit of a bleak scenario. And they ask, if the Chinese do get control, and if anyone in America wants to fight for freedom of communication, where would they go? The First Amendment, right, or the World Court? Where do I go if the CCP does gain control?
That also is a great question. I mean, I really hope it's one of those hypotheticals, or we really don't we'll never get there. But again, I would say you'd you'd want to go to the America's Constitution and our courts and your local representatives. I mean, the American system is, I would think, built to protect these massive encroachments of freedom. So whatever, I hope that American constitutional system could withstand these assaults. So basically what the institutions that America currently has is where I would go. Maybe Second Amendment too.
Here's another question. I think this is an important one. Do you not feel that China already has the ability to control the internet? 5 question marks. This is .com asking.
Right. I think that's a really good question. When I was looking through the speeches, Xi Jinping actually directly acknowledges that China lags quite a bit behind from its rivals, which is basically the US and Europe, in its ability to control the internet. So he was talking about this lack of ability in core technology. So really just like what Americans companies excel at, just setting, DNS and all those other core infrastructural technologies. China, that's something that Xi Jinping explicitly said that China was lacking. And he actually put out a huge plan to drive this technology gap. And what's interesting is that a lot of the plan actually involves, I mean, he talks about spurring domestic innovation from Chinese companies and setting up potentially national champions. But a lot of it actually, when I was looking into speeches was very focused on attracting foreign talent and foreign experts to come to China to basically bring them this technology and bring them their know-how. So again, this is actually very much part of China's general economic strategy, is to basically take from the West and then you use it at home and drive it. So this is very much part of their current plan to dominate the internet. Again, just siphoning Western talent.
Well, so here's the perfect question. We've got to follow this up. Chris McBee is asking, shouldn't our government be putting a stop to infiltration, back America and everything?
Yeah, I think Chinese, I mean, we're just talking about one aspect of Chinese infiltration in terms of technology and specifically the internet. And as another user mentioned, this is just one little piece in their bid to control everything around the world. So I think the US and other countries really need to take a hard look at every single aspect of China's infiltration plan, whether it's in technology, whether it's in academia, whether it's in any other industry, and it basically spans the whole gamut. That is something that many experts and many lawmakers have been saying, that what the US and other countries have been missing, to have that really comprehensive look at how to deal with China.
Let's, I want to jump back to this root server idea, Cathy. So there are these DNS, domain name servers. There's 1,300 of them around the world. And in the past, they were all controlled by the US. Of course, some people had issues with that at the moment. Actually, I don't know if that's entirely correct. So please don't quote me on that point. But basically, China didn't have control of any of them. And now they have control of 20 out of 1,300. Right. And what are the implications of that? Fully, yeah.
Yeah. So actually, there are only I probably didn't make it as clear before, but there are actually only 13 DNS servers in the world, but that's run through a network of instances of DNS servers. So when that's where the 1,300 comes from, and that's spread everywhere, and that none of those root 13 are controlled by China. So I think at least we have that to feel a bit more comforted. But the idea of controlling DNS is, as you've mentioned earlier, you can basically direct or block someone from controlling whatever website they want to go to, or fake websites. So if someone wants to learn about something that the Chinese Communist Party doesn't want them to learn, such as the Tiananmen Square massacre or organ harvesting, and they go to a website that talks about it, if they control the DNS system, that you're using. They can basically route you to another website that gives a fake page that says, no, organ harvesting doesn't exist, it's a bunch of lies, or, oh, this page that you want to go to doesn't exist. So it controls your whole internet experience. So if they do grasp control of basically DNS, they will be able to simulate the internet for you.
Cathy, something that we haven't talked about yet actually is this sort of manipulation of public opinion element of all of this, right? Of course, the CCP has this 50-cent army, basically army of trolls. You can tell me, I don't know that the number of these, how many of these paid and volunteer there are is kind of astronomical. Maybe you can tell us exactly how many there are in a sec, because it keeps growing. I can't even keep up with the growth of it. So there's that whole kind of astroturfing type element, but there's also this kind of just general push in trying to capture certain types of influencers, right? To talk about China in a very positive way, or the Chinese Communist Party in a very positive way. And frankly, he's defined these from your article into red zone, black zone, and gray zone sort of types of opinions. And explain to me how all this works.
Right, yeah. So Xi Jinping actually specifically sees the internet in your three categories, right? So one is the content that is red zone material, and that's anything that the CCP agrees with that needs to be said, like whatever conforms to their propaganda narratives of the day. So those are red zone. And then you have next to red zone, you have this gray zone, which is doesn't maybe I won't say gray zone. I'll go next to the black zone. So black zone is basically anything that directly contradicts what the Chinese Communist Party wants on the internet. So all the sensitive topics we were talking about before, whether it's organ harvesting or Falun Gong or Epoch Times, those kinds of things. And then you have this massive zone in the middle that he calls the gray zone, and that's something that's neither here nor there, like neither very supportive of the CCP or neither not supportive. And I think that's where he sees the war as being battled. Basically, he wants to convert gray zone into red zone, or at least stop gray zone from slipping into black zone, which is not desirable for the CCP. So, and when you're talking about China's agenda to build influence over the world, whether it's through media or whether it's through getting influencers out there to speak for the CCP, I think a lot of it is about converting this black zone into red zone. So yeah, that's basically his plan in controlling global public opinion.
How many of these 50-cent army trolls are there out there now?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think researchers, have put up a range of estimates, and it's in the millions. So when I was looking, one researcher a recent research paper was saying that there's an active crew of 2 million paid internet trolls in China, and supported by an even bigger base of volunteers like university students and Chinese Communist Youth League members supporting them on a volunteer basis. So it's a ginormous, this is just a human army, mind you. So this is the human aspect of their censorship and their apparatus to control speech. And then obviously they have the technological part that, they don't even need people to go through, and they're filtering words that you can't say, and that's automatically done through their AI. So yeah, and what's interesting that we've seen in recent years is that these, previously these troll armies would have been primarily concerned on controlling discussion on the Chinese firewalled internet, but more and more we are seeing that, and Xi Jinping actually directs this, that they need to start going out to basically start trolling the global internet too, and propagating CCP narratives in global online discussion. And we saw this play out exactly last year with the pandemic, in terms of China had its narratives that various narratives relating to the pandemic. Namely, the biggest one is that you can't blame China for its cover-up. So, and then you had this massive push to basically disseminate that narrative abroad, and they've done this at all levels of basically Chinese society, from the diplomats all the way down to these internet trolls and these creating these networks of bot networks to disseminate this propaganda. So they've been really aggressive in that over the past year, and I would expect that this would just keep going as they become more confident in their and they're able to refine their operations more.
Well, so one of the things I recently was talking with Gordon Chang, actually, this is an interview that's actually going to air not too long from now. I think it's about an hour. I don't know what time it is exactly, but it'll be at 7 p.m. Eastern in America. Gordon Chang. And one of the things we talk about in this interview is how the Chinese Communist Party actually actively, through these kinds of trolls and through these kind of social media messaging, basically encouraged American youth to riot, to create, basically had like how-to videos and so forth that were coming from Chinese servers that were basically, seeding the discord, seeding the division in the country and so forth. So this is actually, a lot beyond just kind of controlling discourse. There's an element here of actually, it's kind of a weaponized information to in this part of their unrestricted warfare strategy. Actually, now that I'm talking about it, let me actually refer to you. If you look at this link kind of just below, in theory, I'm pointing towards it right now. If you're part of Epoch TV, which is our own platform, one of the reasons why we don't use YouTube a lot right now, we're just doing these lives on YouTube, is because YouTube is censoring all sorts of material. You probably heard they censored Ron DeSantis, the governor of Florida's COVID roundtable. Basically some of the most valuable, thoughtful public policy experts on health in the world were at this roundtable, and YouTube didn't like what they were saying. They censored it. We were also demonetized there. So we've moved to this new platform called Epoch TV. We're going to be using YouTube sporadically for these lives and so forth. So I encourage you to hit that link and basically sign up for Epoch TV. And it's not just American thought leaders. We've got Larry Elder over there, Crossroads with Joshua Phillip. We've got Roman Balmakov with Facts Matter, and a whole suite of programming in there. So please join us. And I think our control room is actually going to play a trailer of that video at some point. I don't know exactly when that's coming, but we'll take a moment. Let's go back to the question at hand, Cathy. Can you expound on this a little bit, on this kind of weaponization of information as part of China's unrestricted warfare strategy using the internet?
Right. Yeah. So as I was saying, it's not China was very aggressive in propagating, CCP narratives last year in relation to the pandemic. But it's not just about propagating their narratives. A lot of it also, as we saw last year, is also about stirring chaos and discord in other societies to basically destabilize democracies, as Gordon Chang was talking about. Actually, last year during the George Floyd protests, obviously that was huge domestic event in America, and you literally had Chinese diplomats relishing at that moment in poking fun at, America's failed democracy and America's failed state in terms of the state of racial relations, and that narrative of America being, a failed state and having terrible rights abuses in this regard was filtered again from the diplomats all the way down to these networks of these troll networks. And there was research where a lot of these narratives were just being pushed by fake, basically troll accounts, where they were criticizing the US for its treatment of racial minorities. And obviously the irony is that China is the world's worst abuser of ethnic religious minorities. It's quite disgusting, actually. So and even with the most recent I guess, controversy in relation to anti-Asian violence. There was also, I saw social media posts from accounts linked to Chinese United Front groups that are trying to promote people to get out on the streets to protest, and you just wonder how genuine they are, or whether they really want to help the fellow Asian American, or whether they just want to, again, sow that discord and create tensions in US society.
Well, and this is the thing, you know, I was recently talking with someone about there were these protests around Tesla in China, right? Because of course there's a Tesla plant there. Elon Musk was doing all this damage control after that. But this is the thing: there's no such thing as protest in China that's allowed to continue unless the regime has planned it and is thrilled with it, basically. So this whole thing, it's like a kind of a basically like a show, right? In order to get Elon Musk and Tesla to do something that the regime wants. But frankly, a lot of reporting that I saw about this was, you know, basically uncritical, as if this was just another, you know, human rights protest in China.
Right. Yeah. So within China, the CCP is, as I've seen in the documents, is just learning to try to master wielding public opinion for its own benefits. And as you mentioned, the Tesla incident, in terms of potentially manufacturing outrage, is one of them. And we actually see this come up time and time again in China, of the CCP using Chinese people's like nationalist sentiment to achieve certain goals. And another recent incident we were talking about was basically there was a huge, this was a few months ago, boycott campaign against Western companies that said that they would stop using cotton from Xinjiang because of its forced labor of Uyghurs claims. And that launched an uproar from Chinese celebrities saying, we're not going to go to H&M or Zara or those other companies that have made a stance, and we're supportive of Xinjiang cotton and China, and we're really nationalistic. And they're really wielding this sentiment. But of course, the problem with using this sentiment is that it can get out of hand. They potentially have created this nationalistic monster, and then when these celebrities and these nationalistic consumers start boycotting these Western brands, it actually does also hurt China too, because they do need Western money to these companies coming into China. So they also have to tamp that down as well. So you often see them, you know, opening the floodgates and then pulling it back. And that happens quite a lot too in China.
There was a question earlier. I just kind of scrolled past, I think we have an opportunity to address it. It's just like, how strong is China economically? And immediately the thought that I have when I hear that is, you know, China has a huge dependence on US dollars, on foreign money. And this sort of, you know, basically people describe it as an unholy alliance between Wall Street and some, you know, hedge funds, investment funds, and China, and an investment that's actually gone into China in the terms to the tune of billions and trillions of dollars. It's kind of held hostage, if you will. So the money kind of keeps flowing. But without that money, the economy isn't that strong, from what I understand. I don't know, Cathy, do you have any thoughts on this? We'll go back to the internet momentarily.
Yeah, I think that, like, you know, China's narrative right now is that it's weathered the pandemic and its economy is, well, compared to any other developed economy, booming. And I think the problem with trusting what the CCP says is, you know, their system is opaque. They don't have the data is just not trustworthy. So there is an issue of like whether to believe what China says about its economy. Another thing is, just historically, China is still greatly dependent on foreign capital and foreign technologies to fuel. I mean, it has been dependent on this to fuel its rise. So if it were cut off, I would imagine that it would be suffering a lot from, if it didn't have access to the capital. And as we were just talking about the internet, that core technology, all the innovations, they all still come from the West. So if they were cut off from that, it would, I think it would show, and China would suffer as a result.
Well, because for the Chinese Communist Party, for decades, basically intellectual property theft has been a central piece of both their military approach and their business model. It's a kind of fusion there, as you were discussing earlier.
Yeah, I mean, I reported on a speech that a Chinese professor made not long ago, a few months ago, and he was openly bragging that China had copied its way to the world's top row. And basically China's plan, you know, from the 80s onwards was to copy US and other Western technologies, whether through overt intellectual property theft, or another way that they do it is through forced technology transfer, where it's like enticing companies to to set up businesses in China. But the catch obviously is that you need to partner up with Chinese companies. You need to give them your IP. You can only work if you enter into a joint venture with these Chinese companies. So what invariably happens is that these native Chinese companies end up acquiring that know-how, acquiring that IP, and then cutting off their partner and then setting up their own business. And that is how China has been able to develop and flourish the last few decades. And this Chinese professor was actually saying that they've copied everything they can up to now, and they need to actually start trying to innovate. So that is the challenge, and especially now that more and more countries are wising up to China's really, really blatant IP campaigns and really trying to push back and set up guardrails. So China, I mean, Xi Jinping is really emphasizing domestic innovation. But the real question is how they can really achieve that domestic innovation.
You mentioned how Xi Jinping is portraying China as having weathered the CCP virus, as we call it at the Epoch Times, or coronavirus. This is actually, again, this is the topic to some extent of the episode coming up with Gordon Chang in just over an hour. It's actually Gordon makes the case for how what the CCP has done with respect to coronavirus from a number of angles is actually a case of mass murder, global mass murder, and mass murder in the US. It's a pretty compelling case. And, I saw him make it and I thought, we got to get you on the show, Gordon. If you're already a subscriber to Epoch TV, of course, you can jump on in an hour, I think an hour and 10 minutes. If you're not, hit this link below that allows you to subscribe. It's $5 a month intro right now for this and a whole ton of other shows. Please join us. I want to go to a question. I wasn't sure who asked it now because I've lost it in the scroll a bit. This is a little bit off to the side, but he's asking, Xi Jinping has been setting himself up as a real kind of central power figure in a way that hasn't been seen before Mao, or since Mao. And they're now calling him the helmsman title, so to speak. And the question is, if Xi Jinping were to die, or if there was some kind of move made to remove him, can the Chinese Communist Party, can the China basically deal with that, or is this, or is he amassed so much power that it wouldn't, that actually wouldn't work? This is roughly the question.
That's a very interesting question. It is somewhat hard to make predictions in this regard, just because the CCP is obviously one of the most opaque political systems in the world. And in terms of what goes behind the curtains in just within the factions in the CCP, it's really hard to kind of see what's going on. But we do know that Xi has been consolidating his power and trying to remove influences from other political factions, mainly the Jiang faction over the years. So one of the notable kind of plays in this plan was his anti-corruption sweep, where he was arresting a lot of Chinese officials ostensibly on corruption, and definitely probably would have been legitimate corruption charges, but two birds, one stone, also eliminating potential competitors and people in Jiang's camp. So you can see him really trying to remove dissenters within the ranks. The issue is, how successful he has been, and whether, if he were to, something were to happen to him, what would happen. Honestly, I don't really know. I guess my personal hope is that the CCP would crumble and then there would be nothing left. But I would imagine that other people are still waiting to kind of swoop in if that would happen.
I'll offer a little bit of commentary. Just my quick thought is, you can think of the Chinese Communist Party and that system as a little bit of functioning like a mafia. Okay, so there's a Don, and that's, Xi Jinping, and then there's, I think probably the estimate, and Cathy, you can correct me if I'm wrong, I think it's about 200, extremely affluent, extremely connected, powerful families that basically run things over there. And so, similarly as in a mafia type situation, there are some sort of provisions for succession. For some reason, they believe that they're willing to go along with Xi taking on these increasing amounts of power. Obviously, he has the leverage to do that as well, but it's not it's not purely Xi that has the power in this setup, not by a long shot. And there's, one of the things that we've been looking at a bit more recently is how many billionaires and, potentially trillionaires, even, because it's hard to measure, there are, people who have basically taken, so much money out of the system, in a lot of cases without, offering anything close to that in return for the. So these will be topics that we actually cover in further episodes. Let me look here and see what else we've got in the chat. Well, just some really interesting comments going on here. Absolute greed while bleeding citizens dry, right? I think that sounds somewhat accurate. Cathy, I have I'm just going to jump back to my document here. What do you think, and you've already touched on this question a little bit, both from the perspective of an individual citizen and from the perspective of, sort of organizations and governments. But at this stage, right, we have the Chinese Communist Party controlling a number of these multilateral organizations like the ITU, which we discussed, and you mentioned their focus on wanting to control these organizations. You have, this giant, the world's biggest telecom company, Huawei, having made huge inroads, I think, into over 60 countries right now, building infrastructure there. There's Huawei in Canada and even in the US in some places, even though it's being ripped out in the US. We're along the way here and to this kind of, Chinese Communist Party dominance. His plan that you outlined in your article from 2017 and some of these other speeches has been enacted to some degree, right? What does the possession of these documents that we have change for governments, for international organizations that are concerned with these sorts of things, and frankly, for the future of humanity? What is the meaning of these actually having this information in our hand, the real docs?
Right. So I think it literally unequivocally lays out very clearly what Xi's vision is for the future in the domain of cyberspace, which is CCP owning the internet, and CCP basically taking its own firewall and expanding it basically around the world. So the world will be firewalled by the CCP. So I think it spells it out very, very clearly. And in fact, it's not, in a sense, analysts have already known this. And there's been much analysis about China's plans over the years. So I think, to me, it just crystallizes it. And for policymakers out there, it's unequivocal when you have his words when he says controlling the internet is controlling the world, and control for the internet is now one of China's new focuses. Like he directed the CCP to focus on this in its national planning and its national competition planning. So it's right up there in Xi's priorities. This is top of mind for him. So I hope people and policymakers will read this and understand that they're very serious about these plans. And it might not emerge in the short term, but this is definitely what they have in mind for the medium to long term.
I'm going to answer. We're going to finish up momentarily here. There's a question: if we subscribe to the paper, do we get a discount on TV? At this moment, if you are a subscriber to the paper or to the digital edition of the Epoch Times, you actually already have a subscription to Epoch TV. So you're good to go. In the future, that will change. So it's actually an opportunity if you're interested in getting the whole package to sign up for Epoch Times print or print plus digital or just digital. That's also, if you go to the front page of the Epoch Times, you'll see very easily how you can do that. And just to remind you, for Epoch TV subscription, which is just $5 a month right now, introductory, it's just down here below somewhere, if you can find it. Now, team, can we play before we finish up? Can we actually play the trailer for the Gordon Chang episode so people know what's coming?
This is the first time in history that one nation has attacked all the others.
The true scale of the Chinese communist threat.
Word that China may be hacking into India's power grid. As a warning,
they could do, perhaps in the US, what they did in India's financial capital.
The tip of the iceberg of Chinese espionage.
There's more than one Eric Swalwell, which means that there are dozens and hundreds of Christine Fongs.
And the alarming challenge to freedom.
This is a struggle because of who we are, and we don't seem to be doing anything about it.
In this episode, I sit down with China analyst Gordon Chang to understand the true scope of Chinese communist subversion.
What does it take to get us to start to defend ourselves?
This is American Thought Leaders, and I'm Jan Jekielek.
Well, so that was great. I want to watch it now. Anyhow, if you need to subscribe, the link is down here. If you're already an Epoch Times subscriber, an Epoch TV subscriber, you're good to go. Cathy, any final thoughts before we finish up here?
So basically, I think what our reporting has really made clear is that the CCP under Xi Jinping is very, very serious about controlling this very important information domain we have, the internet. So I hope people learn from that, and especially the people who might be a bit skeptical about whether China really means what it says. We can see in the last few years it's already taken steps to do that. So that has been very interesting. So.
Well, Cathy, this has been an incredibly illuminating discussion for me. I'm sure for many people watching right now. I really hope to have you back sometime in the near future.
Yeah, that'd be great. Thanks very much, Jan.
Thank you.
The Me Too movement exposed some long-hidden abuses by powerful individuals in Hollywood and beyond. But there's also another, more radical side of Me Too, seen in the slogan, "Believe all women." Among the accused was Alec Klein, a former Washington Post reporter and journalism professor at Northwestern University.
When you feel your whole life is collapsing on itself.
Klein would become one of the many who were found guilty not by a court of law, but in the dubious court of cancel culture.
I actually had fewer rights than if I had been accused of murder.
In the age of Me Too and cancel culture, what has become of due process? This is American Thought Leaders, and I'm Jan Jekielek.